Who left my son in the trash? Rocco Moretti's voice cut through the dining room like a blade. The Mafia boss stood frozen as Sofia Bellini, the maid's 8-year-old daughter, held a crying newborn against her chest and pointed toward the hospital bracelet on his tiny wrist. Valentina smiled calmly and said the child was not what Sofia claimed. But the little girl whispered, "Sir, I found him there by the kitchen. 3 hours earlier." The Moretti mansion had been silent in the way only powerful houses could be silent. Every marble floor was polished. Every guard stood exactly where he was ordered. Every door had a camera watching it. Rocco Moretti had built his life around control. At 48, he trusted systems more than people because systems could be measured and people could betray you. That night, he sat at the long dining table with his consigliere and lawyers, reviewing documents connected to the future of the Moretti family. The black suit on his shoulders looked like armor. The gold watch from his father rested against his wrist. Everything around him represented power, until a small voice from the back hallway broke through the room. "Sir." Rocco looked up. Sofia Bellini stood at the entrance, barefoot on the cold marble floor. Her old sweater was slightly wet from the rain outside, and her hands were trembling. But she was not crying. That was what made him notice her. Behind her, Elena Bellini, her mother, hurried forward with fear in her eyes. "Sofia, what happened?" Sofia did not answer immediately. She looked down at the bundle in her arms. A newborn baby, wrapped in an expensive cream-colored blanket that did not belong near the kitchen trash area. "I heard something," Sofia finally said, "near the back kitchen door." The room became still. Valentina Moretti entered a moment later, wearing an elegant silk robe, her expression perfectly controlled. She looked like a woman walking into a misunderstanding, not a crisis. "Rocco," she said softly, "this is probably just confusion. She is a child. She may have found someone else's baby outside." Sofia looked at her, then back at Rocco. "No, sir." Her voice was quiet but steady. "The baby was inside your house." Rocco slowly stood. The room changed when he moved. Guards stopped talking. Lawyers stopped writing. Even the air seemed heavier. He walked toward Sofia, expecting to see fear in her face. Instead, he saw something else. Certainty. He looked at the baby first. Then he noticed the small hospital bracelet around the newborn's wrist. It was dirty from the rain, but the symbol printed on it was clear. St. Helena Private Hospital. The same hospital where his first son had been born. Rocco's expression did not change, but his hand stopped halfway as he reached toward the bracelet. "Where exactly did you find him?" he asked. Sofia pointed toward the back of the mansion. "Behind the kitchen, inside the trash area." Valentina stepped closer immediately. "Rocco, please, do not let a frightened child create a story that damages this family." Her words sounded reasonable, almost kind, but Sofia noticed something no one else did. Valentina had not looked at the baby. She had looked only at the bracelet. "Why are you looking at that?" Sofia asked softly. For the first time, Valentina's perfect expression broke for less than a second. Just enough for Rocco to see it. Tiny movement. A moment of fear. Rocco said nothing. He had spent decades recognizing weakness in enemies. He knew that fear did not appear without a reason. Sofia carefully adjusted the blanket around the baby. She was not trying to prove anything. She was only trying to keep him warm. "I think someone wanted him gone," she whispered. The room fell silent again. Rocco looked toward the kitchen hallway, toward the place where no one should have been able to hide anything inside his home. Then his eyes returned to the bracelet. A small piece of plastic. A forgotten detail. A thing everyone else had ignored. But when Rocco turned it over, he saw a number engraved on the back that made his face lose its color. The number on the bracelet was not supposed to be there. Rocco Moretti stared at the tiny engraving beneath the hospital symbol. His face unreadable, but his silence louder than anger. Sofia Bellini stood nearby holding the newborn carefully, watching every adult in the room react. Differently. Elena looked frightened. The lawyers looked confused. The guards looked away. But Valentina Moretti did something much smaller. She took one step backward. Rocco noticed. He noticed everything. "Give me the bracelet," he said quietly. Sophia hesitated for only a second before carefully extending the baby's wrist toward him. She was not protecting the object. She was protecting the child. Rocco took a closer look. The bracelet was old, slightly stained, and stretched from being worn too long. It carried the hospital mark from St. Helena Private Hospital and a faded identification number. To most people in the room, it looked like a forgotten piece of plastic. To Rocco, it looked like a question someone had tried to throw away. "This could belong to any newborn," Valentina said calmly. Her voice was gentle, almost comforting. "You know how hospitals work. Mistakes happen. Someone may have left this here by accident." Rocco lifted his eyes toward her. "You knew the hospital." The room became quiet. Valentina smiled faintly. "Of course I know the hospital. Our family has used St. Helena for years." A reasonable answer. A normal answer. But Rocco did not respond. He simply placed the bracelet on the table beside the legal documents he had been reviewing minutes earlier. Sophia watched him carefully. She could tell something had changed. He was not believing her yet, but he was no longer ignoring her. "Sophia," Rocco said, turning toward her. "Tell me exactly what happened. Not what you think happened. Only what you saw." The little girl nodded. She looked down at the baby first, making sure he was still warm. Then she spoke. "I was taking the trash outside because my mother asked me to help before we went home." She paused. "I heard a sound behind the kitchen door." "A sound?" Rocco asked. "A cry," Sophia said. "But not a loud cry. Like he was tired." No one interrupted. "I thought maybe it was an animal at first. Then I heard it again." She tightened her small fingers around the edge of her sweater. "I opened the bag because I thought someone might be hurt." Elena closed her eyes briefly. She had taught Sophia to help people, but she had never wanted her daughter to discover something like this. Valentina stepped forward. "Rocco, this is exactly why we need to be careful. Children fill gaps in stories. They see something frightening and their minds create explanations." Her words were polite, professional, but Sophia looked at her and quietly said, "I didn't create the blanket." Everyone looked down. The baby was wrapped in the same expensive cream-colored blanket. Rocco picked it up. The fabric was soft. Too soft for a trash area. Too expensive for something someone would casually throw away. "Where did you find this?" he asked. "Under him," Sophia answered. "It was folded around him." Rocco looked toward the kitchen entrance. The question was no longer whether Sophia was telling the truth. The question was why someone had placed a newborn inside his home and expected nobody to notice. He turned to his head of security. "Show me the kitchen cameras." The guard immediately reached for his radio. "Yes, sir." A few minutes later, the security footage appeared on the large screen in the private office. The hallway appeared. The kitchen appeared. Staff moved through the frame. Then the image froze. "There," the guard said. "Camera malfunction." Rocco looked at the timestamp. The footage stopped at 2:13 a.m. and returned at 2:24 a.m., 11 minutes missing. "A malfunction?" Rocco asked. The guard swallowed. "That's what the system shows, sir." Rocco did not answer. Sophia stood quietly near the doorway, holding her small notebook against her chest. Rocco noticed it. "What's that?" he asked. She opened it carefully. Inside were small notes written in a child's handwriting. Times, sounds, things she noticed while working around the mansion. "I write things down when I don't want to forget," she said. Rocco looked at the page she opened. One sentence was written from that night. "Back kitchen door opened at 2:07. Someone smelled like roses." Rocco's eyes moved slowly from the notebook to Valentina's empty chair across the room. Because everyone in the Moretti mansion knew one thing about Valentina Moretti. She always wore the same rose perfume. The rose perfume was still in the room, but Valentina Moretti was not. Rocco. Moretti stood silently in his private office, staring at the frozen security footage on the screen. 11 missing minutes. a newborn hidden behind the kitchen, a bracelet that should not exist, and now a child's notebook containing a detail no one else had noticed. Sofia Bellini stood beside the doorway, holding her small notebook with both hands, unaware that a few simple words written in pencil had just changed the way Rocco looked at his own home. Rocco did not accuse anyone. Not yet. He had survived decades in a world where accusations without proof got people killed and innocent people destroyed. He believed in evidence. Evidence did not panic. Evidence did not lie. "Show me the access log," he told his security chief. The guard immediately pulled up the system records. The screen displayed every door opened inside the mansion that night. The kitchen entrance, the staff hallway, the storage corridor. Rocco watched the timestamps carefully. 2:07 a.m. The back kitchen door opened. 2:13 a.m. The camera stopped. 2:24 a.m. The camera returned. But something bothered him. He leaned closer. "Go back." The guard replayed the log. Rocco pointed at the screen. "Who opened the door at 2:07? The guard checked the identification code. His face changed slightly. "It was a staff access card, sir." "Whose?" A pause. "Elena Bellini's." The room became colder. Sofia looked up immediately. "No." Her voice was small, but certain. Everyone turned toward her. "My mother didn't do that." Elena stepped forward quickly, fear appearing on her face. "Sofia, honey." But Sofia shook her head. "She was with me." Rocco looked at the girl. "You are sure?" Sofia nodded. "She was helping me find my sweater because it was raining. She was in our room when the door opened." The guard looked uncomfortable. "The system says otherwise." Sofia stepped closer to the screen but stopped before reaching it. She did not touch anything. She only pointed. "That time is wrong." Rocco studied her. "Why?" Sofia looked at the numbers carefully. "Because the kitchen clock was broken yesterday. It was 5 minutes slow." Nobody spoke. Rocco turned toward the security footage again. He checked the kitchen. Camera timestamp against another camera in the hallway. There was a difference. 5 minutes. Sofia had not guessed. She had remembered. The guard swallowed. The access log may have been adjusted. For the first time, Rocco looked directly at Sofia with something different in his eyes. Not trust. Not yet. But respect. "How did you notice that?" he asked. Sofia shrugged slightly. "I help my mom in the kitchen sometimes. I know which clocks are wrong." It was such a simple answer that it made the room quieter. The people who lived in the mansion had ignored a broken clock. A child who cleaned after them had remembered it. Rocco looked back at the access record. If the time was changed, then someone wanted the door opening to point toward Elena. Someone wanted the evidence to blame the person with the least power. Valentina entered the office moments later, perfectly composed. "Is everything all right?" she asked. Her eyes moved quickly around the room. The screen, the notebook, the bracelet on the desk. Rocco noticed. "We are reviewing security information." Valentina smiled softly. "Of course. I only hope we don't turn a frightened child into the center of a family scandal." Sofia lowered her eyes. She was used to adults talking about her as if she was not standing there. But this time, Rocco noticed the way her fingers tightened around her notebook. "She is not the problem," he said quietly. Valentina's smile faded for half a second. "I never said she was." Rocco looked at her. "No. You just suggested it." Valentina changed the subject immediately and asked about the baby. She asked whether the doctor had confirmed anything. Rocco noticed the question. Not concern. Not fear. Information. Before anyone could answer, Sofia opened her notebook again. "Sir," she said softly. "There was something else." Rocco turned toward her. "What?" Sofia pointed to another line she had written. "The person who left the baby wasn't wearing kitchen shoes." Rocco looked at the page. A child's handwriting described something adults had ignored. A small detail. A strange sound. Pair of clean shoes near a dirty place. Then Sofia added one more sentence she had written after finding. "The baby." The person who carried him smelled like roses. Rocco slowly looked toward Valentina, because for the first time, the evidence was not pointing toward what happened. It was pointing toward who had been close enough to make it happen. You just answered a question nobody asked. Rocco Moretti's words remained in the room long after he said them. Valentina Moretti stood near the office doorway, her expression calm again, her hands folded neatly in front of her. A person who did not know her would have seen elegance, control, grace, but Rocco had spent his entire life studying people who knew how to hide things, and he had just seen the smallest crack. Now, he needed to know if it was a crack in the wall or the beginning of something much larger. Everyone leaves the room, Rocco said quietly. The guards, lawyers, and staff members moved immediately. Sophia stayed near the door with Elena, holding her little notebook close to her chest. Rocco noticed that she did not ask to stay. She understood something many adults in his world did not. Sometimes being quiet was not weakness. Sometimes it was survival. Sophia, Rocco said, you can go with your mother. Sophia nodded, but before leaving, she looked at the baby sleeping in the doctor's arms. Can someone make sure he stays warm? She asked. It was not a demand. It was not an accusation. It was simply the only thing she cared about. After she left, Rocco turned back to the room. He looked at the bracelet, the blanket, the security report. I want every person who entered this kitchen area last night questioned separately, he ordered. His consigliere, Thomas Russo, nodded. Of course, but we should be careful, Rocco. Right now we have a strange child, a missing camera segment, and an emotional assumption. We do not have proof. Rocco looked at him. I know. That answer surprised everyone. He was not chasing a feeling. He was chasing what did not fit. The next morning, the Moretti mansion looked exactly the same from the outside. The gardens were trimmed. The staff moved quietly. The marble floors reflected the sunlight. But inside, everyone felt the pressure. Sophia stood in the service corridor beside her mother while two security officers reviewed the staff statements. She was not in the grand rooms where decisions were made. She was back where people like her were expected to disappear. One of the officers looked at the report. The access card used at 2:07 a.m. belongs to Elena Bellini. Elena's face went pale. That's impossible. The officer spoke politely. Mrs. Bellini, we are not accusing you. We are simply following the data. It sounded reasonable. That was what made it difficult. The truth could be buried under calm voices and official words. Sophia stepped forward. My mom didn't open that door. The officer looked down at her. Not cruelly, almost kindly. Sophia, adults are handling this. The words were gentle, but they carried the same message she had heard many times before. Stay small. Stay quiet. Rocco, who had been standing at the end of the corridor without anyone noticing, heard every word. Let her speak, he said. Everyone turned. Sophia looked at him. Thank you, sir. Rocco nodded once. Tell me what you know. Sophia looked at the access report. The card is my mom's. But she wasn't there. She pointed toward the printed time. The kitchen clock was 5 minutes slow. The person who changed the time knew that. Thomas looked at the report again. That is a child's observation. Sophia's fingers tightened around her notebook. Yes, sir. But it is still true. The corridor became silent. Rocco did not defend her because she was a child. He defended the question because the question was valid. He turned to security. Pull every access point from the back kitchen. 10 minutes later, another screen appeared. The security team showed the door records. There was the access card. There was the time. There was the missing footage. But then Rocco noticed something else. Zoom in. The technician enlarged the image near the kitchen entrance. A second badge appeared briefly in the reflection of the glass door. Not enough to identify the person, but enough to prove someone else was there. The room shifted. The report blaming Elena was no longer complete. Someone had been standing beside the door. Valentina arrived moments later, perfectly dressed, carrying a cup of coffee as if she had walked into a normal morning. I heard there was confusion among the staff, she said softly. I hope we are not creating unnecessary suspicion. Rocco watched her place the cup down. You came quickly, she smiled. I live here. Yes, Rocco replied. You do. Valentina looked toward the screen. For a fraction of a second, her eyes moved toward the reflection. Then she looked away. A reflection proves nothing. Rocco said nothing. He did not need to, because when Valentina picked up her coffee again, a tiny detail caught his attention. Her right hand had a faint red mark around the wrist, the same shape as the security badge strap shown in the reflection. The red mark around Valentina Moretti's wrist disappeared beneath her sleeve before anyone else noticed. But Rocco Moretti noticed. He had spent his life watching people hide weapons, secrets, and fear. A small movement was often louder than a confession. Still, he did not accuse her. Not yet. A suspicion was not a weapon. It was only a direction. In his world, direction meant nothing without proof. Rocco returned to his private study with the security file, the hospital bracelet, and Sofia Bellini's notebook placed carefully on the table. He looked at each item separately, like pieces from different puzzles. Then he looked at them together. The bracelet, the missing footage, the access record, the reflection in the glass. Too many small things were pointing toward the same night. But small things could still be wrong. I want everything preserved, Rocco told Thomas Russo, his consigliere. No edits. No copies from personal devices. Create a complete chain of custody. Thomas nodded. You think someone inside the house altered evidence? Rocco looked at the security report. I think someone inside this house believed they could. Meanwhile, Sofia sat with Elena in the small staff dining area near the kitchen. She was not allowed in the investigation room, and she did not ask to enter. She understood that adults with expensive suits often believed important things only happened in large rooms. But before she left the corridor, she had quietly taken something from the floor near the kitchen door. Not because she wanted attention, because she remembered seeing it there. A small torn piece of paper stuck beneath the edge of the cabinet. Sofia held it in her hand. Mom, she whispered. I think this was near the baby. Elena looked worried. Sofia, you should not touch things like that. Sofia lowered her eyes. I know, but nobody saw it. Elena looked at the paper carefully. It was not a note. It was part of a hospital document. Corner. Printed date. Partial patient number. Sofia had not understood what it meant. She only knew it looked important because someone had tried to hide it. Elena brought it immediately to Rocco. When Sofia entered his office, she stood near the door and held out the small piece of paper. I found this after the police tape was gone. Rocco did not take it immediately. Where exactly? Sofia pointed. Under the cabinet near the back kitchen door. Where the baby was. Rocco put on gloves before touching it. Thomas noticed. You are treating a torn paper like evidence. Rocco looked at him. Because someone else treated it like trash. The room became quiet. The paper fragment was carefully scanned. The hospital logo appeared first. Then a date. Rocco stared at it. His expression changed slightly. The date was 3 days before the official record of the baby's disappearance. That is impossible, Thomas said quietly. The hospital bracelet had the same identification number, the same patient code. But the official report said the child had never left the hospital alive. Rocco leaned back slowly. He remembered a night years earlier. The phone call. The hospital hallway. The doctor who refused to meet his eyes. The explanation that came too quickly. The grief he was told to accept before he had time to ask questions. For years, he had believed he lost his son. Now he wondered if someone had convinced him to stop searching. Send this to the hospital records team, Rocco said. Independently, not through anyone connected to Moretti. Thomas nodded. And Valentina? Rocco remained silent. That silence answered more than words could. Sofia watched him carefully. She did not ask if he believed her. She did not need to. She had already seen the change. He was not looking at her like a child telling a strange story anymore. He was looking at the evidence. Hours later, the hospital response arrived. The original birth record existed, but one page had been replaced. A single page, a single signature, a single alteration that changed everything. Rocco stared at the copied document on his desk. The missing page had one name attached to the authorization request. Someone who had been allowed to access family records. Someone he had trusted enough to let inside his home. Rocco slowly placed the paper down and looked at the wedding photo on his desk. His eyes stopped on the woman standing beside him. Valentina. And for the first time in years, Rocco Moretti wondered if the person closest to him had been the person hiding the truth from him. The name on the altered hospital page was not a stranger's name. It was someone who had walked through the Moretti mansion every day. Someone who had sat at Rocco Moretti's table. Someone who knew exactly where his family was weakest. Rocco stared at the document without moving. The room around him was quiet except for the ticking of his father's old watch resting beside the papers. For years, he had believed losing his son was the cruelest thing that had ever happened to him. Now he was facing something colder. The possibility that someone had taken that pain and used it as a weapon. Find every record connected to this authorization, Rocco said to Thomas Russo. His voice was calm. Too calm. Every payment. Every employee involved. Every person who touched this file. Thomas studied him carefully. Rocco, if this leads where we think it leads. Rocco looked up. Then we prove it before anyone hears about it. He closed the folder. A man who acts on suspicion destroys things. A man who acts on proof changes them. The investigation moved quietly through the mansion. No announcements. No threats. No dramatic confrontation. Rocco knew something important. If Valentina was responsible, she was not careless. She had spent years building trust. People like that did not break under pressure. They broke when they believed they were still in control. The first discovery came from a financial review. A small payment. Not enough to attract attention. Not enough to appear suspicious. 3 separate transfers over 6 months to a private consulting company that no longer existed. The company had no office. No employees. Only one connection. A former legal assistant who had worked with Valentina before her marriage to Rocco. Then came another piece. A draft of the Moretti family inheritance plan. It was not the final document. It was a preparation document. A version created before Rocco's son was officially removed from the records. The purpose was clear. A different child would become the future heir. Rocco read the document twice. The words did not anger him. They hurt him, because this was not an attack on his business. It was an attack on a child who had never been able to defend himself. Later that night, rain covered the mansion windows. The kitchen lights were still on. Sophia sat at the small staff table with Elena, listening to the quiet sound of a washing machine running in the next room. For a moment it felt like an ordinary night. A mother and daughter. A warm drink. A tired house finally resting. Rocco stopped at the doorway but did not enter immediately. He watched Sophia carefully. She was not looking at expensive furniture or the rooms she was not allowed to enter. She was looking at the baby monitor beside Elena. "You saved him," Rocco said softly. Sophia looked up. "I just heard him." That answer stayed with him. She did not ask for money. She did not ask for a reward. She did not even ask to stay in the mansion. She only wanted the crying to stop. "Are you afraid?" Rocco asked. Sophia thought for a moment. "Yes." She looked down. "But I think being scared doesn't mean you should pretend something is okay." Rocco looked away for a second. In his world, people lied to survive. But this little girl had risked everything she had to tell the truth about someone nobody wanted to question. The next morning, Rocco quietly ordered a complete review of the family legal structure. Not because he wanted revenge. Because he needed to know how deep the damage went. The lawyers found something else hidden in the inheritance files. A clause prepared years earlier. A clause that would automatically remove any child whose identity could not be verified within 30 days. It had been designed to look like protection. But in reality, it created a way to erase someone permanently. Rocco placed the document down slowly. He remembered every meeting, every conversation, every time Valentina had suggested that the family needed stability. Every time he had accepted her words because he was tired of fighting after losing so much. Then he looked toward the hallway where Sophia had stood with a newborn in her arms. A child everyone else had ignored. A child who had seen what he had refused to see. And for the first time, Rocco Moretti understood the most dangerous mistake he had ever made. He had spent years protecting his empire from enemies outside the walls, while allowing the person inside those walls to decide who was allowed to belong. The document sat upside down on Rocco Moretti's desk for 3 hours. He had not touched it. He had not called anyone. He had not confronted anyone. That was what made everyone around him nervous. When Rocco Moretti was angry, people expected noise. When he was silent, people knew he was thinking. And now, he was thinking about every moment he had ignored a small warning because it came from someone the world considered insignificant. The next morning, Rocco walked into the mansion as if nothing had changed. Valentina greeted him in the hallway with a calm smile. "You look tired," she said softly. "Long night." Rocco adjusted the gold watch on his wrist. "Very long." She touched his arm. "I hope the investigation did not create unnecessary tension. Families break when people start searching for enemies everywhere." Rocco looked at her for a moment. "Sometimes they break because nobody searches at all." Valentina smiled, but her hand moved away from his arm. A small reaction, almost invisible, almost. Rocco noticed. He had already learned that the truth rarely announced itself. It slipped. It hesitated. It moved differently. Later that morning, Rocco met with Thomas Russo and his legal team in the private study. On the table were copies of the altered hospital record, the inheritance draft, the security reports, and Sofia Bellini's small notebook. "We need one more thing," Rocco said. Thomas looked at him. "A confession?" Rocco shook his head. "No. A mistake." His plan was simple. They would create a false piece of information and let it travel through the house. Not a lie that could hurt anyone. Just a test. A statement that the hospital had found an additional record connected to the baby's original file. A record that could identify who accessed the information years ago. The information would only be shared with a few people. People Rocco already suspected. Sophia was not involved in creating the plan. She stayed with Elena in the kitchen, coloring quietly while the adults worked. But before leaving, she handed Rocco her notebook. "I remembered something else." Rocco opened it. A small sentence was written beneath the note about the roses. "The lady with the rose smell always turns off the hallway light before she leaves." Rocco looked at the sentence. "Why did you write that?" Sophia shrugged. "Because she never forgets anything else." It was such a simple observation. But it mattered. People who were careful did not suddenly forget small habits unless they were distracted. That evening, the test began. A sealed envelope was placed on Rocco's desk. It had a broken wax mark, as if someone had opened it and closed it again. Inside was a fake report claiming the hospital had discovered a second authorization request. The report was meaningless. The reaction was what mattered. Security cameras watched the hallway. The legal team waited quietly. No one moved. Then, 20 minutes later, Valentina entered the study. She did not look around. She walked directly to the desk. That was the first mistake. She picked up the envelope. She did not ask what it was. She did not ask why it was there. She went straight to the page where the hospital information was printed. Rocco watched from the dark corner near the bookshelf. "Interesting," he said. Valentina froze. She turned slowly. "Rocco." His voice remained calm. "How did you know which page mattered?" She placed the paper down. Carefully. "I was curious." Curiosity usually starts at the beginning. The room became silent. Valentina recovered quickly. "You are testing me now?" Rocco stepped closer. "I am observing." Before she could answer, Thomas's phone vibrated on the table. Nobody touched it. The screen lit up with a new alert. A recovered security file had finished downloading. The file contained the hallway camera footage from the night the baby was found. Not the missing 11 minutes. The moments after. The moments someone thought were gone forever. Rocco looked at the screen. Then he looked at Valentina. Her expression remained controlled, but her eyes moved toward the phone for half a second too long. Sophia's small observation returned to him. The roses, the lights, the habits, the things people ignored because they seemed too small to matter. Rocco pressed play. The screen showed a figure walking toward the kitchen door. The face was not visible yet, but the person stopped beside the camera for 1 second and looked directly at it. As if they knew it was there. As if they were certain nobody would ever see this recording. Rocco leaned closer, because in the corner of the frame, something reflected under the hallway light. A ring. The same family ring Valentina wore every day. The room was silent when the ring appeared on the screen. Not because anyone was surprised, but because everyone understood what it meant. Rocco Moretti stared at the frozen image from the recovered security footage. A figure stood near the kitchen hallway, half hidden by the shadows. The face was unclear. The movement was brief, but the ring was unmistakable. The Moretti family ring. The same ring Valentina wore every day. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then Rocco reached forward and paused the video again. He did not look angry. He looked tired, like a man who had finally found the answer to a question he had been afraid to ask. Enhance the image, he said. The technician worked silently. The room filled with the sound of keys and the faint hum of the computer. Valentina stood near the doorway, perfectly composed. Rocco, she said softly. A reflection proves nothing. You know that. He looked at her. Ido. A pause. That's why I have more. The next morning, the Moretti family gathering was held in the private boardroom of the mansion. It was the same room where major decisions had been made for decades. Business agreements, family succession, future plans. A room where people with power decided what mattered and what disappeared. Valentina arrived confident. She believed the situation was still under control. She believed Rocco was investigating a mystery, not uncovering a betrayal. Around the table sat Thomas Russo, the legal team, senior family members, and the people responsible for protecting the Moretti name. Sofia Bellini stood near the back beside Elena. She was not there because she wanted attention. She was there because Rocco had asked her to be there. For the first time, she was not standing outside the room where decisions were made. Rocco placed the first piece of evidence on the table. The hospital bracelet. The same small object Sofia had found on the baby's wrist. This was found on my son, Rocco said. Valentina remained calm. A bracelet does not prove anything. Rocco nodded. Correct. He placed down the second piece. The original hospital record. This does. The room changed. The document showed the original birth record. Rocco Moretti listed as the father. The child's identity had been altered afterward. The official record had been replaced. Thomas explained each step carefully. The authorization request. The changed page. The false death report. The missing information. Nobody interrupted. Because the evidence was no longer a suspicion. It was a pattern. Valentina looked at the papers. Someone could have forged those records. Rocco placed down another file. They did. He opened the security report. The missing 11 minutes. The altered access log. The reflection from the hallway camera. Then came the final piece. The recovered audio file. Thomas pressed play. The room filled with a woman's voice. Calm. Controlled. Familiar. Once the inheritance transfer is complete, the child will no longer matter. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Valentina's face remained still, but the color slowly disappeared from it. The recording continued. Another voice answered. The voice of the former legal assistant connected to the hidden payments. The conversation confirmed what the documents had shown. The baby was not abandoned by accident. The child was removed because he stood between someone and power. Rocco closed his eyes for 1 second. Only 1 second. But everyone in the room saw it. The pain was not from losing control. It was from realizing he had handed trust to the wrong person. He remembered Sophia standing in the dining room with a newborn in her arms while everyone questioned her. He remembered Elena being treated like a suspect because she was the easiest person to blame. He remembered every time he had walked past people who had less power than him and assumed his protection reached them. It had not. Sophia looked at him quietly. She did not smile. She did not celebrate. She only held on to the truth she had carried from the beginning. "I told you," she said softly. "Someone left him there." Rocco looked at her. The room became completely still, because the smallest person there had been the only one who never changed her story. He walked toward the table and placed the hospital bracelet beside the legal documents. The tiny piece of plastic sat next to years of wealth, contracts, and power. And somehow it was the strongest evidence in the room. Valentina finally lost her calm. "Rocco, think carefully about what you are doing." He looked at her, expression cold and steady. "I am." He turned to Thomas. The next words were quiet, almost gentle. "Call my attorney." The words "call my attorney" changed the room forever. Not because anyone doubted Rocco Moretti had the power to destroy people. Everyone in that room knew he did. The difference was that this time he was not using power to protect his pride. He was using it to protect the truth. In the days that followed, the Moretti mansion became quieter than anyone remembered. Not peaceful. Not yet. Quiet in the way a place becomes when secrets are finally removed from the walls. Valentina Moretti was no longer treated as the future of the family. Her accounts connected to the inheritance process were frozen. Her access to company records was removed. The legal team that once worked for her now worked with investigators reviewing every altered document, every unauthorized payment, and every person involved in hiding Rocco's son. The former legal assistant who helped modify the hospital records signed a cooperation agreement after the evidence became impossible to deny. The former records showed exactly how the plan worked. The hospital page was replaced. The death report was falsified. The inheritance documents were prepared before the child was even removed from the records. It was not one mistake. It was a system built carefully over time. Valentina was not defeated by anger. She was defeated by the trail she left behind. At the Moretti family meeting, Rocco stood in the same room where Sophia Bellini had once been treated like someone who did not belong. The same table where powerful people had questioned her. The same chairs where decisions had been made without people like Elena having a voice. This time, Sophia and Elena sat at the table. Not behind it. Not near the door. At the table. Rocco placed the hospital bracelet inside a clear evidence case before everyone. The tiny piece of plastic that had been thrown away now had a permanent place in the official family records. "This does not belong in a drawer," Rocco said. "It belongs where everyone can see it." Thomas Russo read the final findings aloud. The documents were corrected. The child's identity was restored. The false records were removed. The investigation into fraud and document manipulation was officially opened. Then Rocco turned toward Elena. "I owe you an apology." The room became silent. Elena looked surprised. For years, she had worked inside a house where people with more money had more influence. She had learned to lower her voice. "You were treated as a suspect because you were the easiest person to blame," Rocco continued. "That happened under my roof. That happened because I built a system that watched doors but ignored people." Elena looked down, fighting the emotion in her face. Rocco did not hand her an envelope of money. He did not try to erase the past with a gift. Instead, he gave her something official. A new employment contract, fair wages, benefits, legal protections for household staff. A written policy that every employee in the Moretti organization had the right to report concerns without fear of losing their position. "No one who works here will disappear because they are considered less important," Rocco said. Sophia listened quietly. She was not interested in the numbers on the papers. She was interested in the fact that her mother was no longer standing alone. Later that evening, the mansion felt different. Not because it was bigger, because it finally felt lived in. Rain tapped softly against the kitchen window. The old washing machine hummed in the background. A small glass of milk sat on the table beside Sophia's new school supplies. Rocco walked in carrying a small box. Inside was a new coat for Sophia, simple and warm, with a small star stitched near the sleeve. "Your mother said your old one was too small," he said. Sophia touched the fabric carefully. "Thank you, sir." Rocco smiled slightly. "You can call me Rocco." She looked at him for a moment. "Okay." A quiet moment passed. Then Sophia looked toward the evidence case displayed in the family room. The bracelet was still there. The first thing she had found. The thing everyone else ignored. "Are you going to listen next time?" she asked. Rocco looked at the bracelet, then at the little girl who had changed everything without ever asking for power. "Yes," he said quietly. "I am." Years of control had taught Rocco how to make people obey. But an 8-year-old girl had taught him something far harder. How to listen. And in the end, the truth did not win because it belonged to the strongest person in the room. It won because someone small enough to be ignored refused to let it disappear.